The air inside the briefing room at Fort Benning smelled like stale coffee and floor polish. Captain Sarah Chen stood at attention while the board of officers reviewed her file for the third time that morning. Outside, it was Georgia summer, thick and unforgiving. Inside, the silence was worse. She'd earned this. Ranger School qualified, combat deployments, top marks in every leadership evaluation. The Army needed officers for its newly integrated combat units, and she'd volunteered without hesitation. Not to prove anything to anyone else, but because she'd spent 8 years watching from positions adjacent to the infantry, knowing she could do the work, waiting for the day someone would let her try. The colonel at the head of the table finally looked up. His expression gave nothing away. "Captain Chen, you understand what you're asking for here?" "Yes, sir. You'll be taking command of 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company. These are men who've deployed together, bled together. Some of them have been doing this job longer than you've been in the Army." "I'm aware, sir. Some of them don't think women belong in combat units." She met his eyes without flinching. "Then I'll have to change their minds, sir." The colonel studied her for a long moment. Then he closed the folder. "You report Monday. Dismissed." She walked out of the room knowing 2 truths. She'd been given an impossible test, and failure would be used to close doors for every woman who came after her. The first morning, she arrived before sunrise. The company area was quiet except for the sound of boots on concrete and the distant rhythm of someone running the perimeter. She found her platoon sergeant in the office, reviewing training schedules by the light of a single desk lamp. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres looked up when she entered. He was compact, weathered, with the kind of face that had seen things and chosen not to talk about them. He stood, but the gesture felt mechanical. "Ma'am." "Sergeant Torres, I know this isn't what you expected." "No, ma'am, it's not." She appreciated the honesty more than politeness. "I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to lead this platoon. But I need to know where we stand." Torres crossed his arms. "With respect, ma'am, half these men don't think you should be here. The other half are waiting to see if you'll break. What do you think?" He took his time answering. "I think the Army gave you this job, so you're my commanding officer. I'll do my duty, but earning their trust, that's on you." "Fair enough." She spent the first week learning names, watching how they moved, listening to how they talked when they thought she couldn't hear. The platoon was 32 men divided into 4 squads. Some watched her with open skepticism. Others avoided eye contact altogether. A few, the younger ones mostly, seemed curious but cautious, like they were waiting for permission to respect her. She didn't wait for permission. She showed up to every training, evolution, every ruck march, every weapons qualification. When they ran, she ran. When they carried, she carried. She didn't ask for different standards or special consideration. She knew that the moment she did, she'd lose them forever. But knowing what to do and being accepted for doing it were different things. The breaking point came during a field exercise in week 3. They were running a live fire movement to contact drill, teams advancing under fire, coordinating suppression and maneuver. It was the kind of training where mistakes got people killed in the real world, so nobody treated it casually. She was positioned with the command element, coordinating between squads. When she saw 2nd squads approach, angle putting them in potential crossfire from 3rd squad's position. She called for a hold, redirected the movement. The squad leader, Sergeant First Class Brennan, came over the radio. His voice was flat, professional, but she could hear the edge underneath. "We had our angle, ma'am. We didn't need the correction. Your angle put you in 3rd Squad's sector of fire. I'm not risking friendly casualties for the sake of speed." "Copy," he said, in a tone that meant the opposite of agreement. They completed the exercise without incident, but she knew what was coming. That evening, after the debrief, Torres pulled her aside. "Brennan's been in the infantry for 12 years. He knows his job." "I'm sure he does. He also would have led his squad into a dangerous position." "Maybe, or maybe you're second-guessing every decision because you think you have to prove you're good enough." The words landed like a punch. She took a breath before responding. "Am I wrong about the tactical call?" "No, ma'am, but there's a difference between being right and being trusted. Right now, they think you're trying too hard." She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she recognized the truth in what he was saying. She'd been so focused on proving she could do the job that she'd forgotten leadership wasn't just about making correct decisions. It was about making those decisions in a way that brought people with you. That night, she sat in her quarters and thought about every mentor she'd ever had, the ones who'd pushed her, the ones who'd believed in her when belief was scarce. She thought about her father, who'd been a Marine, who'd told her when she joined that the uniform didn't care about your gender, only whether you could do the job. But he'd also said something else, that leadership was earned through sweat and patience, not demanded through rank. She decided to try something different. The next morning, she found Brennan before formation. "Sergeant, you got a minute?" He turned, wary. "Ma'am? I wanted to talk about yesterday, my call on the movement. You already explained your reasoning, ma'am." "I did, but I didn't ask for yours. You've done this a hell of a lot longer than I have. Walk me through what you saw." Something shifted in his expression, not quite softening, but recalibrating. "I had eyes on 3rd Squad's position. I knew where their sectors were. I was planning to angle off before we hit their line of fire. How much clearance? 20 meters, maybe 25? In a training environment, that's manageable. In a real firefight, with people moving under stress, that's tight. Probably too tight." He considered this. "Maybe. Look, I'm not trying to step on your experience, but I am responsible for making sure everyone goes home. If I see something that looks like risk, I'm going to call it. I need you to trust that I'm not doing it to undermine you. And I need you to trust that I'm not trying to get my men killed, ma'am." "I do trust that, which is why I'm here asking your opinion instead of just expecting you to follow orders and shut up." For the first time, something like respect crossed his face. "Copy that, ma'am." It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even full acceptance. But it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, she made a point of seeking input, not as a sign of weakness, but as recognition that leadership meant leveraging the experience around her. She asked Torres about the personalities in each squad. She asked Brennan about tactics he'd seen work downrange. She asked the junior soldiers about their training, their concerns, their goals. Slowly, the wall started to crack. It cracked further during a night navigation exercise. They were moving through dense pine forest, each soldier navigating to waypoints using only map and compass. She was moving with 1st Squad when she heard the call over the radio. Someone injured, possible broken ankle. It was one of the newer privates, kid named Ramirez. He'd stepped in a depression and gone down hard. By the time she reached his position, he was pale and trying not to show how much pain he was in. She knelt beside him. "Let me see." "I'm fine, ma'am. Just twisted it." "Ramirez, I've seen twisted ankles. That's not twisted. Don't be stupid." She examined it carefully. Already swelling, limited range of motion. Probably a fracture. They were 3 kilometers from the extraction point, rough terrain. She called for the medic, then looked at Torres. "We need a litter carry." "I'll organize it, ma'am." "I'll take a corner." Torres hesitated. "Ma'am, that's what any platoon leader would do. Let's move." They rigged the litter and started the carry rotation. A litter carry through forest at night was brutal work. Uneven ground, low visibility. The constant adjustment of weight between carriers. She took her turns without complaint, rotating through the corners the same as everyone else. Somewhere in the 2nd hour, as they were navigating a particularly steep section, she heard one of the soldiers behind her, private named Jackson, mutter to his buddy, "Shit, she's not even breathing hard." His buddy, a specialist named Park, replied, "Told you, man, she's for real." She didn't acknowledge it, didn't need to, but she felt something shift in the air, like a tension releasing that she hadn't fully realized was there. They got Ramirez to the extraction point. He had a fractured fibula, would be out for weeks. Before they loaded him in the ambulance, he looked at her. "Sorry, ma'am, I screwed up the exercise." "You didn't screw up anything. This is why we train, so we know we can handle the real thing. You did good." After he was gone, Torres came to stand beside her. They watched the ambulance disappear down the road. "They're starting to come around," he said quietly. "Some of them. More than you think. Word gets around. They see you doing the work, taking the same hits they take, not asking for special treatment. That means something. It shouldn't have to. It should just be expected. Maybe? But we live in the world as it is, not as it should be." She knew he was right, but it still burned, knowing she had to prove herself in ways her male peers never did. The real test came 3 months in. They got orders for a deployment to Afghanistan, a 6-month rotation supporting ongoing operations. The platoon would be conducting route clearance, presence patrols, partnering with Afghan forces. Dangerous work, the kind where the enemy didn't care about your training scores or your evaluations. They cared about finding weakness and exploiting it. The night before they deployed, she gathered the platoon in the company bay. Most of them sat on footlockers or stood leaning against bunks. The room smelled like boot polish and nervous energy. "I'm not going to give you some speech about duty or honor," she said. "You know why we're going. You know what the job is. What I will tell you is this. I know some of you didn't want me here. I know some of you still don't think I belong. And I know every single one of you will be watching to see if I can handle what's coming." She looked at each of them in turn. "Here's what I can promise. I will never ask you to do something I'm not willing to do myself. I will never put my career ahead of your safety. And I will never forget that my job is to bring you home. All of you. Everything else is secondary. Silence. Then Brennan spoke up from the back. We got your back, ma'am. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. Other voices echoed the sentiment. Not all of them, but enough. Torres caught her eye and gave the smallest nod. The deployment was everything they'd trained for, and nothing like training at all. Afghanistan in winter was brutal. Freezing nights, dusty days, the constant awareness that threat could come from any direction. They ran patrols through villages where the locals watched them, with expressions that gave nothing away. They cleared routes where IEDs could be hidden in trash piles, culverts, animal carcasses. She learned things about herself she hadn't known. That fear was manageable when you had a job to focus on. That exhaustion became a baseline, a state you operated from. That trust was built in small moments, sharing watch, splitting an MRE, knowing someone had your six without having to look. She learned things about her men, too. That Jackson had a kid back home he talked about constantly. That Park could fix anything mechanical with a wrench and profanity. That Brennan had been passed over for promotion twice and never complained. That Torres carried a photo of his wife in his helmet band and touched it before every mission. 2 months in, they were running a patrol through a village outside Kandahar when the world exploded. IED buried in the road, command detonated from a nearby compound. The vehicle in front of hers took the blast. She felt the concussion wave hit, saw the smoke and debris cloud rise. Training took over. She was out of the vehicle, moving toward the blast, calling for the medic, organizing security. The damaged vehicle was on its side. One soldier ejected, another trapped inside. Fire starting in the engine compartment. Brennan was already there, trying to pull the trapped soldier out. The kid, private named Morrison, was conscious but pinned by wreckage. The flames were spreading. She got on one side of the wreckage while Brennan took the other. On 3, 1, 2, 3. They lifted. Morrison screamed. The metal didn't budge enough. Again, she said. 1, 2, 3. This time it shifted. Torres appeared beside her, adding his strength. Together they moved it enough for Morrison to drag himself free. Brennan pulled him clear just as the flames reached the fuel tank. They ran. The explosion came seconds later, the heat wave washing over them even at 30 meters away. Morrison had a broken leg and internal injuries. They got him stabilized, got him on a medevac. He survived. So did the soldier who'd been ejected. Concussion and broken ribs, but alive. That night, sitting in the firebase, hands still shaking from adrenaline dump, she found Brennan smoking outside the command post. Hell of a day, he said. Yeah, you know, when you first showed up, I thought this was some political bullshit. Brass check in a box, putting a woman in charge to prove they could. Figured you'd wash out first time things got real. And now? He took a long drag, exhaled slowly. Now, I'd follow you anywhere, ma'am. She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. Finally, thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me. You earned it. That's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. You have to earn it. And the standards are higher for you than they were for me. It's not fair, but you did it anyway. Someone had to go first. Yeah. He stubbed out the cigarette. Someone did. The rest of the deployment was more of the same. Long periods of tedium punctuated by moments of pure chaos. They lost a soldier in month 4, a specialist named Davis, who stepped on a pressure plate IED during a dismounted patrol. They held a memorial service at the firebase, stood in formation while Torres called out his name one last time, listened to the silence that followed. She wrote the letter to his family, told them he'd died instantly, that he hadn't suffered, that he'd been brave. She didn't tell them that she replayed that moment constantly, wondering if there was something she could have done differently, some decision that might have changed the outcome. Torres found her that night, staring at nothing in the darkness outside the command post. You can't carry every loss, he said. He was my soldier, my responsibility. He was a soldier doing his job in a war zone, some things you can't control. That doesn't make it easier. No, ma'am, it doesn't. They stood in silence for a while. Then Torres said, For what it's worth, I've served under a lot of platoon leaders. You're one of the best. Not one of the best women, one of the best, period. That means something coming from you, Sergeant. It should. I don't say shit I don't mean. When they finally came home, stepping off the plane into North Carolina humidity, she felt like she'd aged years in 6 months. The platoon had changed too. They moved differently, talked differently. There was a bond between them now that hadn't existed before, the kind that came from shared hardship and collective survival. At the welcome home ceremony, families crowded the hangar, holding signs and balloons. She stood with her platoon during the speeches, the presentations, the official recognition. When they were finally released, she watched her soldiers reunite with their loved ones, wives, girlfriends, children, parents. The joy and relief on their faces was worth every hard moment. Torres approached her, his wife beside him. "Ma'am, want you to meet Elena?" Elena shook her hand firmly. "Thank you for bringing him home. He's the one who kept us all together, ma'am." "That's my job," Torres said. "Yours was to lead. You did it damn well." Later, after the ceremony, after the formal events, the platoon gathered at a local bar. It wasn't required, wasn't official. It was just where they wanted to be, together, decompressing, trying to process what they'd been through. She wasn't sure if she should go, wasn't sure if they wanted their commanding officer there during unofficial time. But Brennan called her directly. "Ma'am, if you're not here in 20 minutes, we're coming to drag you out of your apartment." When she arrived, someone handed her a beer. Jackson raised his glass. "To Captain Chen, for not getting us killed." "For being harder than half of us," Park added. "For proving them all wrong," Brennan said quietly. She raised her own glass, feeling emotion thick in her throat. "To Second Platoon, for giving me a chance and making me better." They drank. Someone turned up the music. The conversation shifted to lighter things. Stories from the deployment, plans for leave, gossip about other units. She sat with them, part of something she'd fought hard to be. Included in, knowing that the fight wasn't over, because tomorrow or next week or next deployment, she'd have to prove herself again, to new soldiers, new leaders, new skeptics. The burden of being first meant that every success was noted, but every failure was amplified. It meant carrying the weight of everyone who'd come before her and everyone who'd come after. But tonight, she let herself feel what she'd earned: respect, trust, belonging. 3 weeks later, she was in a conference room at division headquarters, briefing senior leaders on lessons learned from the deployment. When she finished, the brigade commander, a colonel she'd never met, asked her to stay behind. "Captain Chen, I've been reading your evaluations. Exceptional performance under difficult circumstances." "Thank you, sir. I'm also aware that you were one of the first women to command a combat infantry platoon. That couldn't have been easy." "No, sir, but it was worth it. I'm putting together a task force to develop training protocols for integration across combat units. I want you on it. We need leaders who've actually done this to help us get it right." She thought about her platoon, thought about the possibility of going back to staff work after finally finding where she belonged. But she also thought about all the women who'd come after her, who'd need someone to help clear the path. "I'd be honored, sir." "Good. Report Monday." As she walked out of headquarters, she thought about that first morning at Fort Benning, standing in front of the board, being told she'd have to earn what others were simply given. She thought about every ruck march, every field exercise, every skeptical look and doubted capability. She thought about Morrison, trapped in that burning vehicle, and the way Brennan had looked at her afterward. She thought about Davis, whose name she'd carry forever. She thought about Torres, who'd given her truth when she needed it most. This story wasn't about being the first woman to command a combat platoon. It was about being a leader who'd earned the right to be there through sweat and sacrifice and refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. The Army was changing, slowly, imperfectly, but changing, and she'd been part of that change, not because she'd tried to make a statement, but because she'd simply done the job she'd been trained to do. There would be others now, women who'd command platoons and companies and battalions, women who wouldn't have to fight quite as hard to prove themselves, because someone had already shown it could be done. She thought about what she might tell them, if given the chance. That leadership wasn't about gender. It was about character. That respect wasn't given. It was earned through countless small moments of integrity and competence. That being first meant carrying extra weight, but also opening doors for everyone who came after. That courage wasn't the absence of doubt. It was moving forward despite it. She got in her car and drove back to her apartment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, some literal, some institutional. But tonight, she could rest knowing she'd done something that mattered. She'd led soldiers in combat. She'd brought most of them home. She'd proven that women belonged in places they'd been told they couldn't go. And somewhere, in some recruiting station or ROTC program or basic training company, there was a young woman who'd hear about this and think, maybe I could do that too. That was the real legacy. Not personal glory or career advancement, but making the path a little clearer for whoever walked it next. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished, but it had begun, and she'd been there when it did. She'd